So this is going to be my walkthrough, my process for composition and reference creation. So let's assume we know how to use the theory and the relationships and put this into practice and look at some practical tools. And before we start, I'm going to say that the better your reference, the better your painting. You are welcome to discover the truth of this statement yourself, but if you want to rely on some of my experiences and past regrets, then do your inventing in the reference and not in the painting. Okay, so then whenever I have an inspiration, I will immediately try to lock it into an initial sketch. Just want to get the idea down. I can use words too, which will also help. And this sketch doesn't really matter what it looks like at all, as long as it brings the image, the entire image, to your memory. So obviously I didn't have the other disciples here in the boat. I didn't really know how I was going to depict them just yet, but I knew that they were going to be in there. And I also didn't know how I was going to light this scene at all, because I had a dark storm to work with, and because I rely on light so heavily to make beautiful paintings, I actually almost didn't take on this commission because I didn't know how I was going to do this. So I didn't just sign a contract with my client because I needed to make sure I figured this out first. So then I went to the drawing board after the initial sketch, and I worked on what we call the thumbnail sketch. So this is where you create the composition, or at least the overarching composition. You're mapping out the visual journey. What kind of narrative are you building and telling people and taking people through? And then also repeating that process. So Kevin has rammed this into me to not be married to your first initial inspiration or impression, but to force yourself to kind of take the camera angle, like the viewpoint, and move it around the scene. What if I looked at this painting through the eyes of one of the disciples? How would that painting change? And if I was going to have to sketch that out, what would I have to change? What elements would I have to bring in to convey the same narrative? So I might have to move the people around. I might have to move the lighting around. And it's a great creative process. And Kevin says that usually the composition that comes with your first inspiration is the weakest one. So keep that in mind. And you can see in the top left is the thumbnail sketch that I used for my King David painting, which I did with black and white charcoal, and then I used Procreate for this Mark IV painting. And you can see in both of them that I'm really focusing on the light. Light is the subject. Where do I want people to look? I'm constantly thinking about that, thinking about the visual journey, thinking about these overall relationships as everything is coming together here. So after I did this, then I began to look at reference creation, and obviously I needed a boat, but I don't exactly have the resources to go out on a stormy ocean with a bunch of my friends in a fishing boat and try to photograph them, right? So I needed to find reference, and so I started looking online. I'm searching and I'm searching, and I'm seeing like these rusty old skeletons of ships, and I'm seeing like little drawings, but nothing is at the angle that I need it. Nothing is with the lighting that I need it. And I'm just looking and looking and looking, and I'm just finding nothing. It's really difficult to kind of get those things in place. And I was just about to give up when I stumbled on this little image of this gamified fishing boat. And I realized it was a 3D model for $15. And I had never touched the world of 3D before, but I decided to give it a shot. So I purchased this item, I downloaded Blender. I just figured if I could at least just get this thing into a 3D space, and then if I could look at it at the right angle, at the very least I could just take a screenshot and then throw that into Procreate and then maybe invent my own lighting. I didn't really think about everything that you could do with a 3D software. So this was my screenshot basically. And you can see as I was doing that, I learned from YouTube that you can create entire oceans that have different levels of storms and waves, and it kind of just blew my mind what's available out there these days. You can also see that I put lights on the boat, if you see those different light sources there. And then once I had my overall shot, I just decided to extend the front of the boat. It just looked better compositionally. And just to say, like, do what feels right. Kevin is a big stickler on this when it comes to composition. Try not to follow the most rigid rules, but be flexibly minded and do what feels right and rely on the proportional drawing skills that you've been developing through Evolve. Okay, so once I did that, I then took that image into Procreate, and I could really start to flesh out more of a painting here. So I was painting from imagination with the water, with the storm and everything. And I'm working big to small, so I'm thinking about the environment, think about how the colors would change based on the environment, what the lighting situation will be, because it all determines the perspective and the lighting of everything that we're looking at here. And the imagination element is kind of what's starting to bridge things together. So once I was here, then I went to get photographs for my models. So some tips on photo shoots real quick. Before you do the photo shoot, I would just say have these things ready. First, don't be afraid to ask people to model. I've reached out to random people. They're often flattered, and it definitely helps when you pay them as well. For costumes, you would focus more on capturing the form. The color and the texture are not as important for the costumes that you're putting together, but the form is paramount, and it's really handy to have instead of having to trying to paint it from imagination. It's just so much easier if you go through the extra little bit of work to have something. I also simulated the physics, right? Like part of it is just to inform my brain. Like what does the human body look like when it's careening off the side of the boat, pulling onto a rope, and all of the muscles are tense and being strained. And so I had to simulate those physics. I put up some rope in our little garage here, and I also created the lighting environment. Oh, and then also I'm saying do it looks right again, because that light on the right side is actually technically inaccurate. If I was going to completely, perfectly put it in the right spot, I would have lowered it more to the line of the couch or to the boat, but I didn't like how it was lighting him in the scene. And so there are some liberties that you can get away with as you're putting your pieces together. And it just looks so much better to have the light falling in that direction on his body. Also, I knew that I could shift him around and move him to inside of Photoshop. Okay, another thing to keep in mind, I've just learned this from my own experience, that a lot of times what looks natural feels unnatural for your models, and it can also be more tiring for your models than you realize. And for this painting, the model who was here for it, he actually was pretty much suspended. He was holding most of his weight on the tip of his elbow to get this shot. And whenever he was doing it in a more comfortable resting his head position, it just didn't look right at all. So just keep that in mind. Even if it's a scene where you have your models taking naps as you're photographing them, make them feel comfortable, make them feel safe in this kind of different environment with all the light and all the camera and everything, and you'll get the best shots doing that. Also take shots from different angles, because you still have this thumbnail sketch that you're working with, and you might find that just being a couple inches lower or a slightly downward perspective, slightly upward perspective, a little bit to the side might help perfect the angles and the perspective that you're going for. So you can do that. And then also give your model breaks, because again, it is tiring, even if it's not a super straining photo shoot, just because it's so new to them. And then while they're taking a break, you can then drop the images that you've taken into Photoshop on your computer to then confirm that you are on the right ballpark and you're getting your shots in. And then that way you can make some adjustments on the fly without having to send them home and then do a reshoot if you got something way off, which has happened before. So speaking from experience here. Okay, so then once I had those photos, I used Photoshop to do color corrections, value corrections, and making sure that their sizing is all correct and everything. And then again, I'm using my imagination and understanding proportional drawing to bridge these elements all together. And again, continue to consider the big relationships. Like obviously I'm starting to think small and think about each relationship, each disciple, what they might mean for the painting, but I'm not forgetting the overall picture here. I'm looking at this from a distant perspective. I'm not trying to zoom in too much. And then also don't be lazy. I'm really saying this for myself, because this disciple in front, if you notice, he was not photographed. And I started the painting with this reference, and I definitely should have photographed him. I had to repaint his entire face. I was just a little overconfident. I thought I wouldn't have any problems painting a face from imagination, which is kind of ridiculous to think about, because compared to the reference, the quality of reference that I had in these other figures in my painting, it didn't compare. And so I was forced to go out. And actually, once I had a model and I had such a better expression, such a better structural painting, and it would have saved me a lot of time if I had just gone through the steps, didn't do any inventing or as little inventing as possible, especially for primary subjects like this. Also, another thing I'll say is that you can see the colors are drastically different in the real painting, and those were also changed on the fly. So I definitely, in looking back, I would have done all of that work or most of it in Photoshop before trying to do it on my own. Okay, so that's kind of my process. Now let's just cover some of these tools and what they're useful for. So you can kind of see that I have Procreate, Blender, and photography all coming into Photoshop. So Photoshop is where I bring everything into one place. All of that acquiring that I'm doing, it comes into Photoshop. There are other tools other than Photoshop, but this is the one that I use and super handy. It's great for adjusting size, placement, values, edges, and color. And you can do a lot with Photoshop. Some skills, basic skills that I would recommend is just basic skills in general, particularly adjustment layers are going to be really handy for you. Levels and curves, color balance, hue, saturation, and then some filters. Now for Blender, this is actually, I built an ocean and the boat interacting with the ocean, and I had the lighting and everything. From here I was able to kind of move around and search for the shot that I wanted. I wanted to see like what the boat was going to look like. Definitely overkill. I didn't need to go through all that for the painting in the end, but it was just really cool how was able to help me kind of expand my mind and think about what the scene was going to look like. So Blender is good for creating environments and mechanical structures. You can easily acquire 3D models online and follow tutorials online. Just look for the principles inside of those tutorials and then apply them to the thing that you're trying to do. And some skills that I've acquired so far that I think are important for Blender is understanding how to use lighting and the camera in Blender. And I'm really just focusing on like the form and the lighting. That's really more important. You could do so much more with Blender, but at least for the basics and for painting, these are super handy. Now for Procreate, so that's with like an iPad and a digital pencil, which I've been playing with more and more. You don't need it. A lot of my other paintings were done just, sketching from hand and then taking photographs of those hand sketches. But I found that Procreate is also pretty helpful. And you can do digital painting with it, create mock-ups, paint for imagination, and you can adjust things more easily, right? So if I do a quick sketch traditionally, and as I'm playing with another figure and how he might relate, I might think, man, it'd be so convenient if I could just pick this guy up and move him just a little bit over, and Procreate makes that a lot easier since it's all on a digital format. And then photography is obviously good for capturing your primary subjects. You get high resolution reference material. You really understand how the light is physically interacting with your subjects. And you can also explore things that you haven't figured out, right? You can try different poses, expressions, things like that with your models. So you can, kind of play around in the world of photography. And some of those skills, we already have a live stream that you guys can watch if you haven't watched it already, if you're interested in the photography. I do think that a more complete course would really finish it, and hopefully Evolve will have that someday. But right now we do have this live stream that's available on YouTube that you can watch. That'll cover a lot of the basics. And so yeah, that's pretty much it. As a lot of you know, my origin story as an artist was that I wasn't interested in art. I was interested in writing and things, and I would just do a little bit of drawing for my stories, and I would try writing things out, and I was trying to write novels and things, and I didn't know how to express the things that I saw, so I painted them instead. And super grateful to Kevin, obviously, for teaching me. Once I learned I could paint, I realized, wow, I can tell story using a painting in one image. And that was really when I began to think more broadly about how I could apply art to my life and everything. And it's been, an absolute joy to be able to, share these stories that are coming to mind and get them out onto canvas. So hopefully this was all super helpful to you all. So I think we got some time for live Q&A. If that's all that we have for questions, I think we can wrap up here. But thank you, everybody. Carl, great questions there. I'm going to be thinking about that. Like, what is the difference between good composition and good narrative art? I feel very, challenged in a very good way to think, what is different about narrative painting other than just it being more of a story than something else? Because truly, a lot of these elements that I'm talking about apply directly to so many different kinds of subjects that you're doing, so many different niches that you might have. And I think, that just comes back to what is central to Evolve is the fundamentals. Like the fundamentals apply to different kinds of subjects all the time. And if you can just lock in the fundamentals and understand those fundamentals in a big way, then you'll be able to apply them in broad applications. So, as Kevin says, there's no such thing as advanced techniques. There's only an advanced understanding of the fundamentals. So hopefully I was able to reinforce some of the fundamentals today.
Awesome. Thanks, Daniel. I think it's really cool for you guys to be able to see, you see